Okay. So everyone's doing okay? Good, good. Just to get a sense of who's in the room, are you all first year, second year? If I can just start with you and then I'll kind of go back and just kind of get a feel of where you are here at GRCC.
Second semester.
Second semester? Second semester? Yeah, okay.
Second semester.
Gotcha. And are you all in the same, like same English class or? 101? Gotcha. Okay. Well, just wanted to get a feel of who's in the room. So I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Deven Swanigan. I'm the Labor Relations and Equal Opportunity Generalist here at GRCC. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself before we get into the presentation. So I'm originally from Benton Harbor, Michigan, so about an hour and 15, hour and a half from here, not too far. When I graduated from high school, I went to the University of Denver for college. And so I studied psychology and Spanish. I did a double major there, completely random. I just hated Michigan and knew I wanted to get far, far away. So I started researching psychology programs because originally I thought, oh, I want to be a psychologist. And I came up with that school. I applied, got accepted, flew out there and visited, and I was like, okay, I'm here. And so then after graduation, or during college, I kind of refined what I wanted to do, and I wanted to do some legal work. And I always knew that I was interested in the law. I knew I loved to write, but I didn't know in what capacity I wanted to go. So I applied to law schools across the US, none in Michigan, because I didn't want to return to Michigan. And so I ended up going to Emory, which is down in Atlanta. And so while I was in law school, I kind of specialized in labor and employment law. So anything dealing with the job. So workman's comp, ADA, FMLA, discrimination on the basis of race, religion, national origin, anything dealing with the job, your livelihoods at work was what I became passionate about. And the reason being is because I saw some people lose their jobs at the University of Denver. There were some age-based discrimination going on. And, you know, work is people's livelihoods, right? You know, you spend more time at work than you do at home. And so when you come to work, you need to be comfortable, you need to feel protected and respected. And so that's where my passion came from. So that's what I specialized in law school. So when I left law school, I went to Chicago and I worked at a small labor and employment law firm for about a year and a half. And so I did a lot of research and writing. So writing was a huge part of what I did. Drafting briefs, working with the EEOC, mediating cases, sending demand letters to companies. So language and writing was very important to my role. I didn't really vibe with the firm, more so of the lifestyle that I had, right? Because firm life, especially small firms, you do all the work, you're there from sun up to sundown, and it's like you make the money, but you don't have time to spend it, right? So I said, this isn't for me, I need a change in career path. So actually I left the firm and I moved to a union, which was represented by that firm. So I started doing some labor work. So I worked for the union in Southwest Michigan, so that brought me back to Michigan. And I started representing Meijer, Rite Aid, Harding's. I had a nursing home, I had a factory. And so that work was very different. I didn't write as much. It was a little more technical, a little more representative. There were a lot of things that you had to fill out and draft and like motions and things of that nature. So grievances, and it just wasn't a lot of writing. I did like what I did, but I was still passionate about that equal opportunity work. So, and that wasn't encompassed within that job. So I said, you know, this isn't for me. It's a lot of traveling. You know, it's a good gig, but I can't do this long term. I'm still missing my passion. Labor relations was fulfilled there, but not the equal opportunity. So I left there, and then I came to the college here, where I'm able to kind of fulfill both of those passions. And so I'm just going to talk to you all kind of about what I do and how I do it. So the first half of this presentation is going to be focused on the labor relations piece. And so I'll kind of explain that a little bit, show you what it is that I do here, why language is important, why writing is important, and then we'll transition to the equal opportunity stuff that I do. And then I'll walk you through a case, I'll get you all involved to the extent that you're comfortable with. So at any time, stop me, ask some questions. This is very interactive. Anytime you say, hey, I don't know what you mean, or can you explain that, or anytime you have any just comments, you feel free to shoot them out. All right. So labor relations, what is it? So I deal with contract work here at the college. So we have several unions. So your faculty members, all of your professors are within a faculty union. We have campus police, they have a different union. We have custodial maintenance, they have a different union. And then we also have support professionals, they have a different union. So within all of those unions, there's different rights, there's different responsibilities, there's different benefits, there's different pay scales, different performance evaluations, all kinds of different things. So whenever I'm looking at a contract, I have to take off, my other hat and put on this hat. Okay, I'm in the faculty world. What does this contract say? And so those contracts are called collective bargaining agreements. And so what it is it's an agreement in writing or writings between an employer, which in this case is GRCC, and a union, any of those 4 unions, setting forth the terms and conditions of employment. This includes provisions such as the rates of pay, hours of work, discipline, and other working conditions of employment. So within those contracts, it's talking about all of that stuff. So, it talks about hours of work. So I'll talk about police, for example. Our campus police have changed their hours, right? So they used to work 8-hour days, Monday through Friday. Well, now we have some police who have transitioned to 10-hour shifts. So that contract our current contract speaks to 8-hour shifts. So if someone wanted to take a day off of work, the contract says, you'll get your 8 hours for work. Well, now they're on 10-hour shifts, right? And we still have this contract saying, I only get 8 hours of pay. So the police are like, wait, if we're on 10 hours, when I take a day off, I need what? 10 hours of pay. I need my full day of pay. So it discusses those things, but it doesn't take into account, different changes, different agreements, misunderstandings, things that come up. And so that's why we have memorandums of understanding. So that's outside of GRCC, in my previous work, it's always been non-binding. But here at GRCC, it's a binding agreement outlining the terms and details of an understanding, including each party's requirements and responsibilities. So now the college and campus police have an understanding that we're going to 10-hour shifts, but the contract still speaks to 8-hour shifts. So now we have a separate agreement, a separate document that says we understand this. We understand that they're going to 10 hours. We understand that when they request a day off, they get their full 10 hours of pay and not the 8. All contracts have a specified period of time. So, for example, the faculty contract, because we'll talk a little bit more about faculty contract through this presentation, that contract is from 2016 to 2019. So obviously we're in 2019. I'm in the middle of negotiations right now. We're negotiating a new faculty contract. And then whenever we're drafting these contracts, we have to consider ADA, FMLA. So ADA is, it prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. And then other regulations. So you have Federal Equal Pay Act, Title VII, Michigan Public Employer Relations Act. Whenever you're drafting language, you have to make sure that you're still being compliant with these regulations. So just wanted to give you a brief overview of what a collective bargaining agreement is, what are some of the things that we have to think about when we're drafting these things, how long it lasts, and if we miss something or if something changes, then what? And usually that's a memorandum of understanding. So things to consider whenever you're writing. You want to be clear and concise, right? So say what you mean and mean what you say. That's what I was always taught in law school. I remember my writing professor said, say what you mean and mean what you say. So for example, let's say we were writing a paper and we said, Jane drove to the grocery store. Jane and Anna bought fruit. So now we're left to think, okay, did they drive together? Did they meet up? Did Jane just go to Walmart and Anna went to Meijer, but they both bought fruit? It's not really clear and concise what happened or what took place. So when you're writing, you will want to revise that and say, Jane drove Anna to the grocery store, to Walmart, to buy fruit. So now there's no questions, right? We know how they got there, who they rode with, and for what purpose they went there for. There's no questions that we have as far as how they get there. Did they buy it together? Did they agree? Was it a coincidence that they both bought fruit? So be clear and concise in your writing. I always have to avoid ambiguity at all times. So something is ambiguous if it can be interpreted in 2 different ways, right? So you always have to ask yourself, can this be interpreted differently? So if you always have to ask yourself, can this be interpreted differently? So you always have to ask yourself, can this be interpreted differently? So if you always have to ask yourself, can this be interpreted differently? So you always have to ask yourself, can this be interpreted differently? So if you always have to ask yourself, can this be interpreted differently? So if you always have to ask yourself, can this be interpreted differently? What's the intent of the language? Is that being conveyed? What is it that we're trying to portray? Is that being captured here? So for example, let's say we have a United States company and a Canadian company. They're contracting for insurance. And within that contract, they talk about, it's going to cost this dollar amount. Well, is that ambiguous? Is that ambiguous to anyone? Well, yeah, it is ambiguous because we have a United States company and a Canadian company, and we're talking about dollar amounts. Are we talking about US dollars or are we talking about Canadian dollars? Because those could mean two different things. Those are two different financial implications and just two different things, right? So if we were to see something ambiguous like that in a contract, obviously there's things that we can do. We can look at prior business dealings. Okay, do they have a contract before? Was that in US dollars? Was that in Canadian dollars? Or we would say, where did they draft this contract? Was it in the United States? Because that could maybe be indicative that the intent was United States dollars and not Canadian dollars. Or was it drafted in Canada? So we look at different things, but to avoid all of that, you don't want to be ambiguous. You want to make sure that you're being clear, you're being concise, and that these things can't be interpreted differently. You want to review and edit your work, of course, at all times. What I do, we're constantly drafting emails, things of that nature. So I'll review, I send it to my colleagues. Hey, am I being too harsh? Does this make sense? Is this being conveyed appropriately? And they'll send it back with their edits. We all do the same thing. I told my boss yesterday, I think this is too harsh, you should change this. And she said, no, I intend to be harsh. So thinking about things like that. And avoid creative writing styles. There is nothing sexy about what I do when we write, nothing. So anything flowery, it has to go. So you don't want to say, upon receipt of your request on February 6th. No. We received your request on February 6th. Nothing sexy, avoid creative writing styles. And this might be appropriate in a different setting, right? But in the legal setting, it is not appropriate at all. It's frowned upon. No flowery language. Just say what you mean and mean what you say. So now we're gonna kind of get into some specifics. So this is actually a real contract. This is our faculty contract. So if you go to our GRCC website and you go to the general counsel's page and go to our contracts, you can pull up this contract, that specific article, and you will see this exact language. I show this to say that our contracts are not perfect. There are some mistakes, and we will talk about those mistakes here. So, for example, this contract was drafted in 2016. I started here in 2017. So shortly before I came, this contract was drafted. And one of the things that we noticed was this. So 9B1, so this talks about sick leave, right? So professors' ability to take sick leave if they're sick, their kids are sick, all of that stuff, because professors have time off as well. So for a class that is entirely overload, don't worry about overload, a faculty member shall be granted one class period of sick leave pay for each time per week the class meets. These sick leaves are granted each semester and are not cumulative. So I'll read that one more time and kind of explain what's going on. A faculty member shall be granted one class period of sick leave pay for each time per week the class meets. So that says to me, if I have a class, if I teach one class and I teach that class on Friday, I get 1 day of sick leave for that semester, right? So I'm teaching one class once a week on Friday, I get 1 day of sick leave. The next provision says part-time adjunct shall be granted one class period leave with pay for each time per week a class meets. These sick leaves are granted each semester and are not cumulative. So now we have part-time adjunct. So it's making it seem like it's different for full-time than part-time. And now it's saying a class meets. So let's say if I teach two classes, one class on Tuesday, Thursday, and I teach my second class it's only on Fridays, I now would interpret this to mean, or to say that I have 3 days of sick leave because it says each time per week a class meets. Well, I meet 3 times a week. But up here, it's saying the class meets. So is the language in Article 9B clear and concise? No, it's not clear, because it's not clear to me if I get 1 sick day or if I get 3 sick days. Obviously, it's ambiguous because it can be interpreted differently. What's the intent? We have 2 different clauses, right? 2 different article numbers. We talk about full-time professors, so those are your full-time faculty professors who teach, 4 and 5 times a week, and they're tenured. Those are those faculty members. But then we have the adjuncts, who are usually the practitioners, the people out in the field who will come and teach a course here, who usually only teach 1 or 2 courses. It makes it seem as though we're treating them differently. But the intent was never to give a part-time worker more sick leave than a full-time, right? We would never intend that. Did we intend to use the or a? The intent was the for the college. The union would love a, right? As a professor, I would love to have more sick time. So they're going to argue a, and we're going to argue the. So you have to make sure that you know what your intent is. You have to be clear and concise, because now there's some other implications, right? Anybody, can you think of any financial implications on behalf of the college? Now we're paying out more, we're giving out more money for sick time, right? Because some people are saying, no, I got 3 days, when we only intended 1. We budgeted for 1, not for 3. So there's financial implications for that error. And now let's talk about the administration. So now HR, Human Resources, has to figure out, okay, how do we differentiate between full-time and part-time? And we have over 400 of those to figure out, okay, are they getting those 3 days or 1 day? So there's so many different implications to writing, or implications, for errors that you make within writing. And this was just a simple the and a that's costing thousands and thousands of dollars. So you see why it's important to make sure that you edit, that you're being consistent, you're clear and concise, and you're making sure that your language isn't ambiguous. Any questions about that at all? So that's the labor piece that I do. That's the contract work. We administer contracts. We make sure that they're being administered properly. We negotiate language. And these are some of the things that we have to think about. And I have to not only think about that for the work that I do, but for the entire college, right? We have over 800 employees here. So whenever I'm drafting these things and we're negotiating these things, it matters. And if you mess up, then it can cost thousands of dollars. So the second part of my work that I do here is the equal opportunity. So this is a bit more sexy, and I think you all will enjoy this a little bit more. So I'll get you a little more involved in this. So the equal opportunity is the work that I do, any claims that come up. So we have students who will say, I feel like my professor is discriminated against me because I have a disability, or he's not providing an accommodation, or you'll have employees who say my supervisor is showing favoritism, or whatever the case may be. My supervisor is harassing me. I deal with sexual harassment from student to student, student to employee, employee to employee, all kinds of things. So that's the work that I do. Here, what I'm going to talk about is a policy, and stay with me on this policy because I'm going to give you a case, and then I want to hear what your thoughts are. So we're dealing with GRCC's Equal Opportunity and Non-Discrimination Policy, which is on our website. So if anyone wants to take a look at that, this is the direct language. And it defines harassment as the following. Harassment is repeated, malicious mistreatment, verbal abuse, or conduct that is threatening, intimidating, humiliating, insulting, isolates people at work, or undermines their reputation or job performance through verbal or nonverbal communications. Is this clear and concise? Can anyone catch, there's an error here. Can anyone catch that? Want to see a misusage of a comma? We didn't intend to have a comma behind repeated, and it changes the sentence. So when thinking about like what's required to meet harassment, everything needs to be repeated. But the way this comma is laid, it makes it seem as though malicious mistreatment, verbal abuse, or conduct does not have to be repeated. It makes it seem as though it has to be repeated malicious mistreatment or verbal abuse or conduct that is threatening, intimidating, and so on and so forth. There's actually 3 elements that need to be met here for harassment. You can't just come and say, oh, my professor said this. No, because that repeated is important. So that's the first element. So the way that this is written, if this went to court, a court would look at that comma and say, well, you know, they can argue that that's not an element. Because then you have this or back here. So it can be repeated, or malicious mistreatment, or verbal abuse, or conduct. And repeated, what is that? You know, that doesn't even make sense. So that comma is misplaced. Is there ambiguity? Yeah, because that can be interpreted several different ways. So you see, that's just a comma misplacement. So going forward, you'll notice that that comma is no longer there. I took it out, but our policy, if you look online, it still has that. So let's talk about investigations. So sometimes I'll get a student who'll come forward and they'll say, hey, I believe my professor has discriminated against me on whatever basis. So I'll receive the complaint. Now, we're assuming that the complaint isn't anonymous. GRCC, we do have an ethics hotline, which will ring directly to me, but it's an anonymous hotline, right? So you can basically, you can give your complaint. You don't have to give your name. I mean, you can give as much detail as you like. Obviously, the more detail, the better follow-up we can have. But we're assuming that, and you know, these steps are different if it is an anonymous complaint. So we receive a complaint. So I'll bring the complainant in. So it can be either one of you. I'll bring you into my office. I'll talk to you. I'll take detailed notes. I'll read the notes back to you to make sure that I capture what it is that you're conveying to me. Because then I'm going to write an investigatory report based off of what you told me. So I need to make sure that that's accurate, clear and concise and not ambiguous. So then I'll notify the respondent of the complaint. I'll say, hey, Professor Z, a complaint has been made against you, and I'll talk to the student. If they're okay with their name being released, you know, I'll say by Ashley or by a student, so on and so forth. I need you to come in and speak to me. So then that professor will come in and I'll speak to them regarding the complaint. Step 5, I'll speak to any witnesses or others who are involved as recommended by the complainant or the respondent. So if the student says, hey, my friend was there, you should ask Kim as well. Talk to Kim, she has some good information. Or if the professor says, you know, Kim was there, talk to Kim. I would call Kim in to speak to her to say, hey, what did you see? And then after I've talked to everyone, I've received all the information I need, I'll draft an investigatory report. So my report would have six sections. The first is a sequence of investigation. So when was the concern received? Who was interviewed? It's just formulaic. Summary of facts. So I'll go through everything that everyone talked about. So to the extent possible, I avoid the use of pronouns. He, she, they, because who are they referring to? Who is he? Who is she? And a lot of times you don't want someone to read your report and think, I have no idea who this refers to. I use relevant facts, so obviously students will give a lot of information, professors will give a lot of information. All of that information isn't relevant and needed for your report or your decision. And use direct quotes instead of summarization. So I will say, Professor Z said in quotation marks. I won't say Professor Z felt as though the student was being disrespectful. I will say Professor Z said, and in quotation marks, exactly what he said. And then you have your relevant policies that you're basing this off of, your analysis of the issues. Is there sufficient evidence to support the conclusion that a policy was violated? So that's where you spell out those elements. So those 3 elements that we talked about, that's where you spell those out. You have a conclusion and then a recommendation. Sometimes the recommendation could be, the adjunct isn't, after this course, the adjunct can no longer teach at GRCC. Or sometimes it can be something more lower level depending on what the complaint was. So as I said before, I'm gonna give you all a case, and I kind of want you all to get involved in this. So this is a student who came to me about harassment, and this is what they say. I'm being harassed by my professor, my psychology professor. I walked into class late along with 4 other students. The professor looked at me and said, Henry, I'm not at all surprised that you're late. Shortly thereafter, she stated that she smelled fried chicken. She then turned to me, the only African-American student, after the 5 of us sat down and asked, Henry, did you bring fried chicken for lunch today? Later that same day, when we were discussing the effects of various parenting styles, my professor turned to me and asked, do all black children get spankings? I believe that she is harassing me because I am African American. She was surprised that the other 4 whites, or she wasn't surprised that the other 4 white students were late. She associated fried chicken with the only African American in the group, and she singled me out to speak on behalf of all black children. So this is a pretty typical complaint that we will get. I mean, we have a lot of complaints here at the college. This is pretty typical. So this student is feeling like, you know, oh, because I'm black, I'm always late. Oh, because I'm black, I eat fried chicken. You know, she's singling me out, asking me about all black families. I feel like I'm being harassed. So some things to keep in mind. Remember those 3 elements? We're looking for, is it repeated? We're looking for malicious mistreatment, verbal abuse, or conduct. That is, all of those things. What's going on in your minds? What are you thinking? You think it was repeated? Were there more than one comments going on? Yeah? What about, was it either malicious mistreatment, verbal abuse, or conduct? Does it come across as malicious to anyone? Now keep in mind, one of the things that I have to keep in mind, obviously we take complaints very seriously. But when you get a student who comes in, they're emotional, you know, they're gonna give you their side. This is before meeting with the professor, this is before meeting with any witnesses. Right off the bat, is any of that malicious to any of you? Probably not. Is it verbal abuse? You would characterize it as verbal abuse? Okay. Anybody else? Is it conduct? Probably so, it's conduct. Is it threatening now? 3rd element? Intimidating? Is it intimidating to any one of you? Would you feel intimidated if you were a student in that position? You would? Insulting? Humiliating? Getting a lot of nods. Is it isolating? Obviously, this is people at work, but is it isolating? Is it undermining their reputation? Okay. So let's walk through this. So this is my investigatory report. So I would type this out, sequence of investigation. On January 17, 2019, a student, Henry Davis, went to Tina Hoxie, Dean of Student Affairs, with concerns that Professor Sheila Pratt made comments that he felt constituted harassment and were discriminatory on the basis of race. Hoxie notified Deven Swanigan, Labor Relations and EO Generalist of the concern, and subsequently, Swanigan met with the student. Is that all clear to you all? You know who's who, what's their position, when it happened, where it was reported, what was the report, and who it finally landed with. Interviews conducted. Over the course of the investigation, Swanigan met with the following. Henry Davis, so I met with him on January 21st, and Sheila Pratt, the professor, met with her on the 23rd. So I would summarize my facts. On January 17th, Davis was escorted to Swanigan's office by Hoxie to discuss his interaction with Pratt and Pratt Psychology 201 course on that day. Davis reported that Pratt said to Davis, "I am not at all surprised that you are late," when Davis and 4 other students simultaneously entered the classroom after the class began. Davis did not respond to Pratt, right? So in my investigation, when I'm talking to students, I'm saying, what was your response? Well, what was the professor's response? You know, did you say anything? How did that make you feel? And depending on what I get will be included. So Davis never responded to Pratt. He just, you know, heard the comment and just continued to walk. Davis reported that Pratt stated that she smelled fried chicken after the 5 of them entered the classroom and sat down in their seats. Pratt turned to Davis and asked, "Henry, did you bring fried chicken for lunch today?" Davis replied, "No." When Pratt began discussing parenting styles, Pratt turned to Davis and asked, "Do all black children get spankings?" Davis replied, I did not get spanked, and I'm not sure what takes place in all African American households. Davis said that he believed the comments were targeted at him because he is African American. Davis said that he was upset and embarrassed. And that's important to put because we're talking about humiliating, we're talking about isolating, those feelings. So you want to make sure you include that. So now this is Pratt. This is when I bring in the professor. Swanigan asked Pratt why Pratt stated, Henry, I'm not surprised at all that you are late. Pratt replied, I had Henry in Psychology 101 last semester. Henry was always late to class. I made the comment as a joke, not because of his race. Swanigan asked Pratt, what made you think that the smell of fried chicken came from Henry? Pratt replied, Henry was the only one who entered with a bowl in his hands. I assumed the sudden smell came from his bowl. I did not assume that because he is black, the smell of chicken must have come from him. Swanigan asked Pratt, why did you ask Henry if all black children got spankings? Pratt replied, we were discussing cultural differences in parenting. Now that I think about it, I probably should not have singled him out. Is this changing anything for anyone? Yeah? It's pretty typical, right? Because a lot of times I'll get some complaints and I'll be like, really, professor? Really? Did you really do that? Did you really say that? And then they'll come in and then, you'll get the full scope of things. Or sometimes they'll say, yeah, I was wrong. That was stupid of me. I probably shouldn't have done that. So this is the policy that we're looking at just up here, equal opportunity and non-discrimination, prohibits discrimination, including unfair treatment or harassment based on a protected class. His protected class is African American. So this is my analysis of issues. There is insufficient evidence to support the conclusion that Pratt violated GRCC's equal opportunity and non-discrimination policy. Pratt said that she did not single Davis out when he entered the classroom late because of his race. She made a joke because Davis was repeatedly late to her class the prior semester. Pratt said that she did not single Davis out when she smelled fried chicken because of his race. Davis was the only student with a visible bowl, so Pratt assumed that the sudden smell of chicken came from Davis's bowl. Pratt acknowledged that it was inappropriate to ask Davis about parenting in the African American community. Pratt was found to be credible. So with that, when in my investigations, I'm looking at credibility as well. Like, do you believe him? Do you not? Is that reasonable? Really? Things of that, we will say that, like, really? I have to ask that to myself in all of my investigations. But Pratt was found to be credible. The equal opportunity and non-discrimination policy, so this is where you're putting it up against the policy, defines harassment as that long sentence. Whereas there were 3 instances of alleged harassment, so that's that repeated. So now we're back to our writing. We're looking at our elements, right? We have to satisfy those things. The statement and questions that Pratt made were not malicious mistreatment, verbal abuse, threatening, intimidating, humiliating, insulting, or undermining. There is no evidence that Pratt's conduct rises to the level of harassment under this policy. Now, some might argue, I beg to differ. That was kind of humiliating. And then I'll say, well, what was humiliating? The first 2 where, he was always late, it was a joke, he had a bowl, she just assumed, or the last part where she apologized. And someone will say, well, that last part, to ask and single him out because of his race, but then that's only one instance. So was that repeated? So that's why your writing it's formulaic in this field. You have to look at elements. You have to make sure, that everything is being satisfied. Giving a holistic view, paying attention to commas, thes, a's, all kinds of things. It's important in every aspect. So my conclusion would be Pratt did not violate GRCC policy 6.2, equal opportunity and non-discrimination. And then I always give recommendations. So I will say it is recommended that Pratt refrain from making jokes that may single an individual out. In addition, Pratt should rely on empirical evidence and data instead of personal experiences of students. You're a psychologist, right? You have the data, you have everything, the research in front of you. Speak from that. Don't single someone out based on their race. or their personal experiences. So these are some of the recommendations that we would send out, and professors would be receptive. You know what, you're right. You know what, and some professors give pushback. Well, if we can't joke in class, then what? So we get some pushback, and then it's a conversation that kind of ensues. But this is my recommendation: making sure you're being clear, you're being concise, you're being, speaking to, the issue at hand, things of that nature. So it's important to make sure that you're capturing everything. So who cares and why bother? Writing is essential to not only my role, but many roles in many settings. So when thinking about the collective bargaining agreements, they govern employment and practices affecting hundreds and sometimes thousands of employees as well as the employer. We've seen in my earlier example how the and the A can affect so many different people. We have over 400 faculty members. So those two words affected over 400 individuals, and in turn affected the employer, GRCC, because now they're paying out more money. So writing matters, and we should care. So mistakes can have significant financial repercussions, inadvertently giving more sick time off than needed. And so then my second part, investigatory reports, they can potentially be placed in an employee's personnel file. So, sometimes this results in discipline, terminations, corrective action notices, performance improvement plans, all kinds of things. And if this is in someone's personnel file, then this can be potentially viewed by a subsequent employer. Or it can affect your raises. It can affect your promotions within your current positions or your current department. So what we put in someone's personnel file needs to be accurate, unambiguous, clear, concise, all of that good stuff. So writing is super important. So I will say to you all, no matter what field that you go into, make sure that you're being clear and you're being concise and you're making sure, okay, can this be interpreted differently? Am I being too harsh? Is this accurate? Did I capture all of the elements here? Did I take a look at this and figure out, okay, what's relevant and what isn't? A lot of times we'll get the students and they'll come in and they'll say, and then there was another time when the professor started shouting. Well, he wasn't shouting at me, but he was just still shouting. Well, is that relevant to this harassment claim for race? No, it's not. It's something to keep in mind, and maybe it would be housed in the recommendations, but it's not pertinent to the charge at hand. So make sure that you keep all of those things in mind in whatever you do. So any questions or comments? I know I kind of went through a lot of that pretty quickly, but those are kind of my two roles. Yes? Probably not. So this was a case that it's very similar to some of the stuff that we deal with, but that was something that I kind of made up, but super realistic. From my experience, sometimes yes and no. So Davis could be still upset. Like, I felt emotionally torn. I was humiliated. Like, I know what I felt. And here you're telling me that it's okay, that, the professor didn't mean it like that. So we'll get some students who are just upset. And then some students will, transfer out of the class, and we'll work with students. If they want to transfer out into a different course, we'll work with students, but we'll let students know that conversation was had, and this is what became of it. Now you will have some students who are pleased, like, oh, wow, phew, I'm glad my professor isn't a racist, or I'm glad that that's what was going on in my professor's head, because that's not what was conveyed to me. I could have sworn my professor was singling me out because of my race, but I'm super glad to hear that. And sometimes professors will circle back to the students and apologize and say, hey, I'm so sorry you felt that way. I didn't mean anything, but of the 5 of you students, you were the only one that I had last semester, and you were always late. It was just a joke, didn't mean any harm. Your bowl, not saying that there weren't any other bowls, but yours was the only one visible. And I just all of a sudden smelled chicken. It could have been on the scent of someone else's clothes. I just assumed it was you. And so some students are receptive to that, right? And they'll say, you know what, I get it, and I'm glad to hear that, and thank you so much. So it can go both ways. Any other questions at all? Yeah.
So in a situation where you get a complaint and say you recommend terminating professors,
Mm-hmm.
can the school still go against your recommendation and do what they want with it?
Well, so yeah. So I'm on the side of the school. So typically, if I recommend something, then typically that's what happens. Typically, not all the time. There have been times where, let's say, I've recommended termination, and GRCC or HR, because then they would be the ultimate ones doing it, like administering the discipline. They'll say, no, we'll just give them a corrective action notice, or a final warning, or something like that, or suspension. I've seen that. So they don't always. HR doesn't always, follow the recommendations, but most of the times that they do. Any other questions at all? I hope this, one, gave you a good picture of what it is that I do, but two, just kind of convey the importance of writing in my role. And I'm hoping that, no matter what field you all go into, you can take something from this lesson and make sure that you're being clear and concise, unambiguous, and all those good things within your writing. So it is important. I think writing is in every single field. What I will say is that with those union contracts, we have to keep in mind who those audiences are, right? So custodial maintenance is not that they're uneducated, but they're more hands-on, right? They're more short, clear, concise, so their contract looks completely different from the faculty contract where everyone has PhDs and masters, so you have to recognize who your audience is. And that can go from something as simple to your emails, right? When you're sending out emails, being clear and concise, organized, what's the issue? What are we talking about? Making sure that, is this comma misplaced? Is this what I intend to say? So from your emails to your contracts to anything that you're doing, keep these things in mind. All right, well, if no other questions, I thank you all so much. My contact information is here. I also have some business cards that I'll leave here. I'll also kind of give a plug as well. So the Title IX office resides with us as well in General Counsel. So in Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of gender. So it covers stalking, sexual assault, sexual exploitation, domestic violence, dating violence, all kinds of things like that. So that's housed in our office if anyone has any issues or any questions. It also covers transgender and pregnancy as well. So please feel free to come to our office, talk to us, let us know what you need, and we'll work things out for you. We'll assist as much as possible. And then, of course, obviously, if you have any issues with professors or other students that may relate to discrimination, then I'm your guy. So I'll leave my cards up here if anyone wants to come down and grab one, and thank you for your time.